Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am getting ready to start my first project using this month's Cards, Tags, and More kit from Jolie. It has everything you need to build your own holiday recipe book. There is the Jolie chipboard album, the book reams to go with it, the dividers, the 6x8 paper pad, some recipe cards, and the ephemera pack from Simple Stories Baking Spirits Bright line, and about 3 feet of this coordinating ribbon. I'm kind of gonna give you a heads up on how this video is put together. It's not exactly edited in a linear fashion. Since I tend to film as I'm building and as I'm thinking things through, sometimes some projects end up very jumbled. They don't necessarily get recorded in a way that makes a lot of sense. It might not make a lot of sense if it was tried to be watched in the same order. So this particular project is really one of my more edited and cut and put back together videos. So I'm gonna explain really kind of how it's put together. I focus the first part of the video on the cover creation and how I decorated the cover, and then I go to the insides and how I put the pages together, and then I move on to assembly. And I just warning you about this sort of kind of patchy edit, because there will be times when, say, you're watching the first part with the assembly of the cover and you might see pages that have already been completed, or you'll be watching the pages part of the video and you'll see the cover that's not completed. But I really kind of wanted to put it back together when I edited it in a way that at least kept the sections together, so that there wouldn't be, maybe 5 seconds of cover followed by some insides going back to the cover. It was really a lot of back and forth as I worked on this, and a lot of it had to do with I kept having to work on the cover until I was really happy with it. So I kept thinking of things to add and try. All right. Now that my thought process is out of the way there, the first thing I did on this cover is get everything a nice coat of red paint. There's been a lot of red paints in the past from Jolie. I didn't put any gesso on these pages. I am just using this Jolie red paint as my gesso, and I'm just putting it on thick, double coating it if I have to, covering the entire front and the entire back, and then on the insides I'm just doing around the edges. This is my first go around on getting that homemade with love and butter to really kind of stand out. So I started with some rustic wilderness distress paint. I was trying to fill in the cuts with it to see if I could darken it, see if I could get that green to show. That's why I watered it down, just to try to get it to run in. Then to add a little bit more, I used the Rustic Wilderness Distress Crayon, still trying to darken it and green it up. And I'm just going to say that this cover really went through a lot of evolution. There was a great evolutionary process for this cover until I was happy with what I got. For this step, I used the Rustic Wilderness Distress Spray Stain and brushed it on, using a thinner brush to try to get it into the cuts, sprinkled on some oak leaf olive Lindy's Gain embossing powder, and then I would brush off any excess that was where I didn't want it. I worked in small areas, heated it as I went along, and then just came back in and kept brushing it on, building up my layers, trying to get that homemade with love and butter to pop out of that layer of red paint. And even though all of this green isn't really seen in the end, I still wanted to add it into this because I think it was helpful. It was helpful by the time I got to my final layers because I did already have some buildup, especially with that embossing powder to raise up the letters on the homemade. And that is where this stands right here. When it came to the line and to the with love and butter, I covered those areas with the Distress spray stain and then dumped on the embossing powder and then brushed off at the surface, kind of try to fill in the gaps with everything. After all of that, to try to bring out those words a bit more, I came in with some impasto, I think it's poppy red, and gave the cover a coating of that. It's a heavy acrylic paint, so I wanted to add that to the cover anyhow. I kept it watered down around the text so that I could wipe it off easier, and then just tried to reheat the embossing powder to get it to pop back up through that paint. And then in my quest of still trying to get everything the way I'm picturing it, I came in with the Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide, sprayed it on, watered it a little bit, wiped it up, dried it up, added a layer of microglaze, added another layer of the oxide, added another layer of microglaze. You can kind of see how I'm really trying to build up the contrast between the homemade with love and butter and the rest of the cover. I was trying to decide if I wanted to add gold accent or silver accent, and I did choose gilded. I think that's the name of the gold toned foundry wax. And I do like how these foundry waxes work just because I can brush them on. I can brush them on where I want them before I heat set them. So you can see how that gold wax is working here. I'm just brushing it on top of the oak leaf olive, but because it is a more liquid wax, I'm actually able to rub it in to the with love and butter and the little divider line and get those areas to show up a little more. I came in with the Distress Crayon again, and I used it to go around where I had put that foundry wax on, just to try to cover up where the excess had been and add some more definition and contrast around those areas. I threw this part in here since I am working on a section for the cover. I wanted to add a little bit from the Simple Stories pieces in here. So I just put together this little cluster to add to the front, and originally I was just going to put it down on the bottom, but as you saw in the finished pictures, I do end up using it behind the homemade with love and butter. I just took it over to my sewing machine, I added a little bit of decorative stitching, and I popped in a brad through the hole on that little tag. And this is where I finally worked out exactly how this was going to come together. Well, mostly exactly. I just drew some lines on there and then came through with my craft knife, and I just cut along the top and the bottom so that I could slide that cluster that I had put together in behind it. I traced on where I wanted the pieces to go so that I could add shadow effect where it was going to be sitting. And since I had finally figured out how this cover was gonna look, I decided to come in and add a little bit of stenciling. I used some StazOn for the leaves, some metallic red paint for the berries, and that was just because it was on the cover and I wanted to make sure it would go on top of the microglaze that I already had on there and that it would be permanent. I slid my cluster in behind my slots, and since I didn't have the other side of the cover done yet, I was able to just stitch it right into place, and that just makes sure that it's going to stay down. I covered the papers with the microglaze, that way I would be able to protect them from the next set of mediums coming on. I just started layering layering up the various rustic wilderness mediums. I was really trying to go for a look that already made it look like that this album had been handed down already, maybe a generation or two. I added some decorative stitching around the text box. And here, at first I was going to put the foundry wax on just the text. And then when I was rubbing it, I realized that I really preferred it more as the entire background. So I spread it across the whole background. I used my Candy Apple Red Distress Marker and some Lindy's Gain embossing powder. And then finally, after all of that, I was finally happy with how everything came out. Having the foundry wax as the background, and then having that embossing powder, that red gold Lindy's, pop that text out. After I had let everything sit and dry for a bit, I just kept looking at it, and I really wanted to re-brighten the areas on here. I came in with some white gesso and just brushed it on carefully. That way, when I came in with this pencil and wet it down to spread it out, the gesso kept anything underneath from reacting. Plus, it gave me a layer. It gave me a layer on top of that micro glaze. And then to get the grandma's cookies to show up a little bit better, I just came in with a jelly pin and traced back over it. For the inside pocket on my front cover, I just wanted a simple pocket with a simple flap over it. But I also didn't want it to just flap about. So I added a couple of light magnets to the flap edge. I cut a piece of that pink and white plaid print paper to reinforce the edge and to cover those magnets. And then behind the background paper, I added a couple of paper clips for my pocket to add a little bit of reinforcement and to make sure it was deep enough so that I could get that holly print paper to line up where I had cut it. I added a piece of the red and white circle paper, glued those together, and I just stuck them under my mat right here to hold them flat while that glue dried. And take this opportunity just to talk about a little bit about what I did to the edges of everything. Talk about the mixed media part of this. I used Candied Apple Distress ink around the edges. I used the Candied Apple Distress watercolor pencil. I think I added a little bit of iced spruce watercolor pencil in some areas. So that's the majority of what you will see me using, just to add a little extra color to my pieces. All right, I do talk about this a little bit more later. Different ways that you can protect your pieces. I end up using a lot of lamination because I have a laminator. I have the laminating pouches. A thinner option is some packing tape. It's a relatively strong tape. It's clear, and I used that on this edge of my pocket. Moving on to the back cover, I added more of that impasto paint, dried it up, and because I was planning on putting a clear pocket on the back, I did come in and coat the entire inside of the back cover with more of that impasto paint. Then I grabbed up this stencil from my stash, some white embossing powder, and went to work adding my candy stripes to it. Used some candied apple distress ink just to add a little bit extra red to the red areas, and then just came in and added some of that Lindy's Gain that I had used on the Homemade with Love on the front cover. For the inside of the back cover, I wanted to add a little bit extra around the edges where the pocket was going to be, so I added some Distress Oxide and a layer of microglaze to protect it. This is my pocket. It is, I'm pretty sure it is from We Are Memory Keepers Fuse. It's a fuse pocket. And even though I end up not using the actual fuse to do it, I do use a lot of fuse pockets and stitch them. The little card on the front of this pocket, I already laminated and then I stitched it on before I folded up the pocket. And then for the closure, I just sort of built up this little tab with some magnets. I stitched up the edges of the pocket. And then since it is on that back cover and it is a clear pocket, I used some clear Gorilla Glue, the clear grip. It's not the regular or super glue Gorilla Glue, it's clear grip, kind of like the E6000. And I tried to keep it behind the stitching or behind the images so there wouldn't be glue spots that would be able to be seen, and then I just glued it down. Alright, right now I just kind of want to cover different things I had thought of that could be done to add some protection to your papers, to your dividers, some reinforcement. It is a cookbook, so kitchens tend to get hot, they get humid. So I wanted to add some protection. If you have dye inks, water soluble mediums on there like the watercolor pencils, you're going to want to make sure that they don't get reactivated in that humid environment. Hopefully make things a little easier if something gets spilled. So I use my laminator and laminating pouches. They add strength. They create a seal all the way around, and they're see-through. So they're kind of my all-in-one, and I really love using them in cases like this. You have the option if, say, you have the fuse or you were thinking about getting a fuse or what have you. You can use fuse pouches. I know a lot of us probably have a lot of the 12 by 12, maybe the 8.5 by 11. Anyways, your page protectors for scrapbook pages. If you have those lying around, they're relatively sturdy. They can be cut down and resized, or in the case of what you saw when I did this front pocket earlier, you can use some packing tape. I wouldn't use it to coat everything, but you could use it for the edges where it will be on the binder rings. So going back to my assembly, I wanted to center my background pieces in the area between the edge of the chipboard and the edge of the hole, and it works out about 1/4 of an inch. So I just marked them so that I would be able to line things up. I went about 1/4 of an inch from the outside edge and from the top edge, and that's where I put my mark so that my papers would be centered in the area that didn't include the holes. Alright, so you can see how it's really very easy to cut down some of those scrapbook page protectors. You can even use the one edge that already has the holes in it and just add them right into your recipe book. They're easy to stitch through. I stitched through at the highest length of my sewing machine so that it wouldn't just create a perforated edge. I have a Senior heavy duty and I just set it at 4, which is the highest number on it. Mine went through fine as they were. My feed dogs didn't scratch up or catch on that plastic. You might want to practice with your own sewing machine if you're going to go this route. You can use these to create your covers. I will tell you from experience, it is It is very difficult to get this slick plastic to stay smooth on the paper if you're trying to stitch it, just because it is such a slick plastic. I don't know if you were going to go this route, you might want to work maybe in small stages, maybe add some glue, like some diamond glaze, since it dries quite clear, to kind of tack that plastic in place before trying to sew through it, because it will slide around a lot on you. Well, it slid around a lot on me. It might be me. I sew out of necessity, and I sew in paper crafts. That way, if it messes up, I can just claim that I meant to do it and it was part of the decoration. Packing tape actually works rather well, and it's pretty sturdy for hinges. And for protection, I wouldn't coat large pieces with it just because it is only so wide. It does work. I don't know how long the life of it is, but it does work, and I'm pretty sure it's not acid free. You have some hinging tape. It's expensive, but if it's within your budget and you're able to use it, it works pretty good. And some of it is actually relatively thin, so it doesn't add a lot of bulk. I'm just going to grab up a little piece of this packing tape, try to explain what I was thinking of with using it for a hinging area. I would put one layer on the front and one layer on the back. That way it would cover the edges of adhesive, and it would double up that hinging area. Other options for hinges is some thin fabric. I am pretty sure that this is some blanket edging that was taken off of a blanket. I had it rolled up and sitting off under my sewing machine in my cabinet, and I actually just sort of glanced over while I was talking and saw it and decided that's what I was going to use for my hinges. This is just to show you why I think it was blanket binding. You can go to the store and you can find some blanket edging. It's pretty strong and it's thin, so it won't add a lot of bulk. I'm not using this one that is still new and in the package because it's really more of a maroon color. I was just fortunate enough that I had that nice bright red piece that I assume my grandmother had removed from an old blanket. For any hinges, you can just extend the pouch you're using. If you're using a pouch like this from Page Protectors, because it is a flexible plastic. If you have a fuse, you can get the fuse plastics, create some fuse pockets. It's really a matter of using what's within your budget, using what you have, and also based on exactly how interactive, how involved that you want to make your recipe book. However, for me, I love laminators. I love laminating things that I want to be sturdy and protected. I don't waste any laminating pouches. I will cut down my laminating pouches to the size that I want to use. And then for my hinge, I just go and I stitch it on. All right, the rest of this is actually, it's really able to go by a lot faster since I have covered my basic thought process and the supplies that I am using. So I go through and I kind of quasi build my pages. I don't glue anything down. I get my pieces set up that I am going to be wanting to use, and I get the pieces laminated that I'm sure that I'm going to want laminated. And even though I do change things up a little bit when it comes to assembly, I do take this opportunity to work out my basic layout. I work out where I'm gonna want magnets for my closures, because my magnets they're very thin magnets. They actually do fit through my laminator. I wouldn't try to put anything thicker in, but these are very thin magnets. They're really not that much thicker than paper clips, so I am able to laminate them in with everything. Some of my pieces, like this one right here that I'm putting through with the parchment paper, I'm putting it through in parchment paper because I only laminated the back side of it. I kept the front side open so that notes could be written on it, but it would still be sturdy, at least with one layer of lamination. to create some cohesion on the divider pieces, I cut 1-inch strips of that pink and white plaid pattern paper. I scored them so that I could fold them in half. I added double-sided tape to them, and then I laminated them. I had a lot of We Are Memory Keepers fuse pockets lying around in my stash. They've been here forever. I decided to take this opportunity to use them up. Even though I didn't use them with the fuse tool, I stitched them into place. I'm using this page as one of my examples of my assembly. Depending on how my pages were going to be going together, sometimes I would stitch things all the way through the chipboard if I could cover up the stitching on the other side. And there you can see my stitching. I stitched my 4 pockets in place. This is for my family favorite section. I thought that those numbered pockets worked out really very well for there. I used a couple of pieces of the ribbon from this month's kit for my hinges on those 2 flaps. I stitched around them for some decoration. I stitched that smaller card in place. As I'm using clear pockets on this side of the chipboard, I came in with some of that impasto paint. I covered it all up with that. I painted over all of that stitching. It really camouflages it, and those pockets really do cover the majority of the area, so it actually works out relatively well for me. I went through page by page, section by section, the same process, laminating parts that I want laminated, stitching where I could stitch, and building up all of my pages. So since I think that I have covered all of the products that I've used, I've covered how I put my pages together. So I'm gonna speed up this part of the video and let you just watch, maybe get some ideas. The assembly process is basically the same. I don't think I do anything else new. If I do, I'll just make a note of it on the screen and kind of point out any differences that might arise. Sometimes I would come in and I would just make a wraparound closure. This one has a bit of that blanket binding that I use as the closure, and I just stitch it to a laminated card that has the magnets in it. I almost forgot about this page, because this was the cookies and candy section, and I don't know about you, but for some reason the majority of my holiday recipes are cookies, candies, all the yummy stuffs. I wanted to make it an extra thick section, so I cut little strips of that lamination. I think it's a 1/2 inch. And I laminated it on both sides right down the center of that ribbon. I did also add a single line of stitching right down the center of that just to help hold that lamination in place. Since it doesn't come off of the edges, that created kind of a little book within here. And I do that in a few sections, but just at different thicknesses. But I really liked how that cookies and candy section came out with just that little extra 1/2 inch of that ribbon stiffened up with that bit of lamination. I alternated my edges every other page. I either have that pink and white plaid along the edges of the dividers, or I actually just went through and I cut strips from the packaging from the recipe cards and the dividers and just used a plain white side of them to my edge reinforcements. I cut my hole reinforcers out of the parts of the packaging that had the pictures. Using the packaging allowed me to have a wide variety of hole reinforcers that coordinated without having to cut a little hole out of a lot of different pieces of paper. I used my Judikins diamond glaze to hold my reinforcers because it was going to be going on top of the paint, and I used some red twine from my stash. It's thicker than standard baker's twine. I used some red twine from my stash to hold my pockets closed. I just used a standard 3-hole punch. Mine is adjustable, so I could make sure that everything was lined up the way it was supposed to be. For my stitched together section though, I couldn't slide the whole thing in the little gap on my regular 3-hole punch, so I just marked where I needed the holes and used my crocodile to get those holes punched through. On my cover, if you can see, it's nice and it's shiny now because I had so much on there and it was the cover. I wanted to make sure it had a nice layer of protection, so I went and sprayed some of the Krylon triple thick crystal clear spray, something like that. Anyways, I only put 1 coat of that on. I didn't need a lot of coats, but I just really wanted to make sure that that cover was protected. I got my rings in place. You can see I have all of my sections clipped together, and I go through page by page, start my building process. I do just keep my recipe book sections clipped together. That way I can take it all over at once and do all of my sewing all together. For my appetizers and my sides and salads section of here, I used the 2 dividers, the appetizers and the sides and salads, as the outside of the section, and then put one of the chipboard pieces in between. On some pages I would stitch the pockets to the background sheet and then just glue it all down together onto the chipboard. On this particular piece of chipboard, I made an entire wrap. This wraps around from one side of the chipboard to the other, and then I just made my own little string tie thingy to hold it closed. As I completed each section, or at least mostly completed each section, I started putting my book together, and that was just because with all of the plastic, things wouldn't stop sliding. They wanted to slide everywhere. It was driving me crazy. So I started putting the book together because it kept falling over. Anyhow, for my little snowman here, I actually laminated the entire back of him. I laminated the top, and I added a little bit of lamination at the bottom because there is a magnet down there. I just left where the lines are unlaminated so they could still be written on. I did all of this lamination on him because he was just going to be dangling off from a piece of string. I tie it under his arms, make it look like he's sort of swinging on that little bit of twine, string, twine, whatever it is. It's pretty thick, so we'll call it string. Yeah, the red string. I just have him sort of dangling on that red string, and I actually do add a little bit of lamination on top of the lamination to hold the string in place. On the snow globe, I do the same thing as I did with the snowman. I laminate the back for stability, and I laminate the bottom to protect it and to strengthen it. And I just leave the lined area unlaminated so it can still be written on. This little section is my main dishes section. and I just created a little booklet out of it, except I didn't add any lamination to the ribbon. I just make a single wrap that goes all the way around to hold it closed. And on the back side of the chipboard, I just use one of those little laminated flags, bannery type pieces. I stick a brad through it. That's to hold down the bottom pouch, which in turn also holds down the ones above it, since I do just have my wrap that goes around and catches the edge. In my cookies and candy section there, you can see on the right hand side my little pouches. These were fused pouches I had, and they had the little decorative edges already in them. So one of them, which was already a tag edge, the tag from the kit didn't quite fit in it, and I actually just sewed it on the outside. It is laminated, so it's still protected. But the other three on that page, I couldn't resist filling up with some sequins, because cookies, candies, sprinkles, it worked for me. It made the little connection. They kind of remind me of sprinkles that you would find on your cookies. I have some gold stars. I have some large red, I think it's actually technically glitter, large glitter, and then I just have some of those greenish sequins. I think they matched pretty good with the opposite page that is the back side of the cookies and candy divider. And then this is where I brought in that snow globe and just hunt it down, and I put a magnet under the gingerbread paper, and then just put a paper clip on the back side of that snow globe. For my desserts and pies section, which is, I think I'm finally getting close to the end of this assembly process, I have my pouches glued to the back of the divider. I have my pouches and pockets stitched to the papers, and even though I had originally thought of making little door flaps on this, I changed my mind and decided just to make a lawn kind of swing arm type of closure. The main assembly is done. I have everything on the rings so that it quits sliding around on me. So I am just going to go through and finish adding any finishing touches that I might need to. If I need to take out any pages, then I just do that one at a time. For the back side of that soups and salads divider, I take it out just so I can stitch that little card along the edge. It's laminated on both sides, and it's just a tuck-in spot that catches the edges of the little pockets. And I get my snowman put in place, and I just add this little flip so that I can use the brad for the magnet that is on the snowman. And I just pop a little snowflake eyelet at the top of the divider to tie my snowman onto. And there you have it. My major assembly is done. The only thing I have left is just to add some strings to those pocket closures. The good thing about this style is as it grows, if you add more, you can just get larger book rings. I think I have the ones that came in the kit pretty much maxed out. I hope that you enjoyed this project and it gave you some ideas of what you can do to create your own holiday recipe book. I tried to think of alternate means of assembly and protection to try and cover a wide range of options. I have a lot of different sizes of pockets and places to put notes, recipes, memories, anything you want in here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Give us a thumbs up and feel free to share this video. Thank you, and I will see you again next week.